Like, sure. So, welcome to the team. Good job. You really rocked it out today, so good job. So we've set out to do this Christmas series, our first official Christmas series, and doing series is so much fun because it's always a different crowd every single week. So it's like I have to recap every week what it is I said, which is okay because none of you were really listening to begin with. So it gives me a good opportunity to really revisit what we've been talking about. So we've decided to call this Christmas series An Unforgettable Christmas. And some confusion came with that because people thought we were talking about this being an unforgettable Christmas. But what the reality is that we're talking about the first Christmas being an unforgettable Christmas in so many ways. And what we sought out to do was talk about how that Christmas, which really didn't happen on December 25th, just so you know, but that Christmas marked an unforgettable beginning to a new era. And so we sought to talk about that. And so we started out by preparing a really good message on peace, and then coming down with the flu and not being able to give it. And then Jenna stepped in and not only ran the whole setup team like she always does and gets this place looking awesome. Let's just give her a round of applause. But anyway, so not only did she run the whole setup that day, but then at 1 o'clock in the morning she planned out the talk for the morning, and she talked about peace and simplicity. And we talked about how the birth of Jesus came to bring a world that is desperately in need of peace, a world ravaged by external war and internal war, peace. And she talked about how that can be in our own lives too. And then we sought to talk the next week, when we all got healthy, we talked about hope. And how the first unforgettable Christmas came so that we could have hope. And we looked at a group of people that were searching for hope and how they found it. We talked about the wise men, all 150,000 of them, because we can just throw numbers in front like people do. We talked about the wise men, how they had found a light and had pursued it. And then we talked about Simeon, the man in the temple, who had waited his entire lifetime hoping to see the Messiah based on a promise that he was given. And on that day when he heard the voice that said, "Go in the temple, your promise is waiting for you." And he went in and he saw, and the promise was that he would see hope. But like the promises for all of us that we would see hope, not only did he see hope, but he held hope. That he took him up in his arms and he raised him up and he held with his hands hope. So we talked about what it means that Jesus came to bring hope to a hopeless world. And then last week we talked about joy. We asked the question, is it really possible to experience real, consistent, lasting joy in our lives? And I looked around and I thought to myself, and I talked with you guys about how the reality is that so many of us really have dismissed the concept of joy as something that's completely unattainable. So we explored how Jesus came to give us lasting, consistent joy. And we compared the story in Luke about how Mary and Zechariah, the prophet, the father of John the Baptist, received the message of hope and how it brought him joy. And we contrasted the two of them, and we saw the differences. And both of them eventually got it, but one got it a lot quicker, and that was Mary. We talked about how Zechariah was in the presence of God, serving in the temple, but how Mary carried the presence of God within her, and that was her source of joy as she carried Jesus. We talked about how Zechariah asked the question, "How will I know?" and skeptical criticism and doubt. And how Mary asked, "How will this be?" The difference between skeptical criticism and childlike wonder. And then we talked about how Zechariah, because of his unbelief, was given silence. And we talked about how Mary, because of her belief and her faith, was given an incredible song of joy that has been passed on throughout the ages. And then we looked a little bit further and found that Zechariah himself was restored to a place of faith and given himself an incredible song or message from God. Jesus came that we might have peace in a world that is filled with anxiety. He came that we might have hope in a hopeless, dark world. He came that we might have joy in a society that is inundated with depression. But what happens when you just cannot find it? What happens when you hear these messages, but the darkness is just too strong? What do when you get inspired to have peace and joy, but you go home and you just cannot shake the darkness? I want to unlock one word today. Just one word. It's a word that we love to throw out there at Christmas. Immanuel. And that word means God with us. Matthew 1, 22 and 23. I don't have it on the screen. I'm just going to read it. This is after the birth of Jesus was announced, and this is what it reads. It says, "All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they will call his name Immanuel," which means God with us. Immanuel. And what's happening here is Matthew, the writer of this account of the life of Jesus, is looking all the way back to Isaiah chapter 7, when there was this promise to a king who was in great fear. And Isaiah comes and tells him, listen, don't be afraid. You don't have to be in fear, because all these armies are attacking them and they're about to destroy the nation of Israel. And the king of Israel at the time is in terrible fear. And Isaiah says, ask for a sign. God wants you to know that you're going to be okay. That in the midst of the darkness that is surrounding you, the Assyrian army that is gathering around you, some of you this morning feel like this army, this massive army, has just encamped around you. And so we're crying out, God, what do we do? And Isaiah says, ask for a sign. And the king, like an idiot, says, I won't ask for a sign. Listen, if God tells you you can't ask for a sign, ask for a sign. He says, I won't test God. I'm too good for that. And Isaiah says, all right, we'll give you a sign. And then he says, the virgin will conceive a son, and his name will be Immanuel, which means God with us. That in this dark moment, we have the light of Christmas. In this dark moment, God is shining his light and saying, you are asking for a sign, and I'm telling you, here is all you need to know. I am with you. That is all you need to know. I am with you. When the darkness is surrounding you and you can't experience the peace, the hope, the joy of Christmas, when you're fighting and you're struggling and you're striving, and all the words that are coming out of our mouth mean nothing to you because the darkness is too rich, God is with you. Immanuel. It's the key to unlocking the doors of peace, hope, and joy. To understand the simple fact that God is with us in the darkness of the world. We are in such a dark, dark place, and in a dark, dark time, and we can't perceive and we can't understand it as much as we try. But in order to really try to grab the idea that God is with us, what we're going to do is we're going to turn to the darkest moment in the history of mankind. Think of all the dark things that have ever taken place. Holocaust, the Dark Ages, Bills versus Dallas in the Super Bowl. Think of all the dark places. Bills were, wide right, Scott North. Dark, deep depression. Think of the darkest places, and we're going to go back to a moment that trumps all of that, to a place where it's unlikely that you would find the Christmas story. We're going to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, to the birthplace of darkness and the birthplace of hope. This is not a laughing matter. Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to read it. We're going to skip. I'm going to give you a little preface real quick. What's happened is many of us know the story. Take it literally, don't take it literally. However you want, the principles are still the same. I happen to believe that it really did happen like this, but hey, let's get the truth out of it. So here's what happens, is that Adam is created, and his beautiful, wonderful, smoking hot wife is created, and they're put together in absolute paradise. There was no problem in Eden. And God surrounds them, and he gives them everything that they needed, everything they could possibly want. Every desire was fulfilled immediately. They were living in paradise. And you know that God puts a tree there. He surrounds them with a whole lot of trees. And then he tells them, here's one tree. Don't touch it. We get into the debate of free will versus the sovereign will of God. Why would God put a tree in the garden? He did. He puts a tree there and he says, don't touch this tree, or else it's going to be bad. And so, as it always happens, the woman, I'm just kidding. For those of you who don't know the serpent, represented by the devil, tempts Eve, who shares with Adam. Who was more at fault? Who cares? And in that moment, we look at it and we're like, so they ate a piece of fruit and all of a sudden sin enters in, and no big deal. We skip on to the rest of Scripture. But in the reality of that moment, it is absolute, sheer, and devastating tragedy. Because if you can look at every dark thing that has ever happened in the history of your life, in the history of this world, it points back to this one moment when darkness entered into perfection. When darkness crept in to light and began to spread. And what happened is it began to spread, as Romans tells us, through all mankind. And as humans reproduced, evil reproduced and grew. And as the population expanded, darkness expanded and covered the entire earth. And we are living now in the light and in the shadow of that moment. But we can learn a lot as we just look at the personal problems that took place. First thing we see, God with us. That God is with us in the darkness. Adam takes a piece of the fruit, and they realize what's wrong. They see their nakedness, their shame, and they hide. And God comes calling. He asks a profound question that we think is maybe just a question, but it is a profound question, because in the moments of our deepest darkness and our desperation, and I don't know some of the dark moments that you've experienced, but I know, and even some of my light moments of darkness, I have a tendency to cry out in sometimes anger, and sometimes despair, and sometimes frustration, even and sometimes wonder, God, where are you? I asked it Friday when I saw what was going on, and as I began to think of the families whose hearts have been ripped out of their chests. And I asked the question, I said, God, where are you? Who here has ever asked that question? God, where are you? It's not a bad question. But in the moment of deep darkness, we hear God asking the same question. Adam, where are you? Do you think God didn't know where Adam was? I mean, he's God. He sees everything. But here's what happened. Adam was with God. He was walking with God. They were together. And all of a sudden, it's broken. And God is calling out, Adam, where are you? And in the times of our deepest questioning, when we're crying out, God, where are you? I want you to understand that He is asking the same question. Where are you? And so we can say, well, maybe He wants us to answer that. But I believe that He's giving us a revelation of what was going to take, of what became God's role from this moment on. You see, in this moment, God's role was sweet fellowship with Adam and Eve. And God went from friend and father and creator and everything good, and He went from this moment to also a different role of seeker. Adam, where are you? If you want to know where God is in the darkness, here's where God is in the darkness. He is searching for us. He is in this lost and broken world, seeking out His lost sheep. Jesus said in the book of Luke, He said, the Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost. That is Immanuel, God with us in the darkness, seeking and searching for the lost ones. Where are you? Has He found you? Have you responded to that question? And here's Adam's response. I'm just going to pick it up right here. I started in verse 8, but I'm going to jump right to verse 10. It says, and this is Adam, and he said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. I was afraid. Fear. Where did that come from? There was no fear. But all of a sudden, Adam finds himself afraid. Afraid. Every moment of fear you have ever experienced in your life is traced back to this moment. First comes the shame, the weight of our separation from God. Then comes the fear. Because fear is simply a result of not realizing that God is with you. And when you look and you realize the nakedness of your own state, and you realize that you are no longer with God, fear comes in. And our enemy, who really exists, he will do everything he can to find a different avenue to bring you fear. But it comes down to this one thing. Adam, where are you? And he said, I don't know. I messed up. And I realized. And now I'm scared. And here's the most tragic part of it all. He wasn't scared of his environment. He wasn't scared of his surroundings. He wasn't scared of his wife. He wasn't scared of the serpent. He was scared of God. Adam, where are you? The first thing we realize about the promise of Immanuel, God with us, is that he is searching for us. That's where he is. That's his business. That's his role. That's what he's been about from that moment. He is searching and seeking for us. And in that moment, out in this horrible tragedy, God is seeking and searching. And our job is not to question God, where are you? Understandable question, but our job isn't to ask God, where are you? But it's to say, here I am. Here I am. Because he's asking you. And so we read on. We're just going to skip a little bit. We're going to head right up to verse 14. After they explained to God what happened, like he needed an explanation, they explained to God what happened, and this is God's response in verse 14. He says, the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock, and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between her offspring, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust. And to dust you shall return. And we all just look at that and say, Merry Christmas, everybody. The curse. The curses are doled out. And it is, like we talked about earlier, this is where every piece of pain, look at relational strife. Whenever you fight with your husband or your wife or your spouse or your sons or your daughters or your neighbors or whatever, it comes back to this moment. Adam and Eve, they were one, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. They were one. And now God is saying, because of the darkness that has entered in, because of your decision, you now will be fighting each other. You now will be in contention. And it goes to all of us. You know, we think, and listen, I'm not here to promote a political agenda. I haven't even researched the whole concept of gun control or anything else, but we think that guns were the reason what happened on Friday is what happened. Look, one generation outside of Adam and Eve, and you see Cain and Abel, and Cain did not have a gun. He found a way to murder. Darkness spread quick, and it spread far. Every curse, all the way up until death itself, From dust you were formed, until dust you will return, comes from this incredibly dark moment. But I want to ask you a question. And for those of you who actually have a great memory and were at Crossbridge a year ago when I gave a similar message, I asked a question. I said, how many curses do you see when we read this? We see God doling out curses. And how many do you see when you read this? Now, for those of you that were there and remember, don't answer, or just sit silent and pretend like you were there and you remember, whatever. How many curses do we see? Anybody? I mean, we read it. We see the serpent, we see the man, and we see the woman, right? Come on, all you accounting majors. What was that? 3? We see 3 curses that are given out here. And as I read this a while back, this guy just like puts a spotlight on this and says, listen, there weren't 3 curses here, there were 4 curses. You see, we see that God joins us in the darkness to search for the lost. But more than that, He suffers with us. See, the curse that was given to the serpent was terrible. The curse that was given to man, tragic, devastating. The curse that was given to the woman, well, anybody that's ever had a baby. But we find buried in here, in verse 15, talking to the serpent, he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Who is this that we're talking about? It's Immanuel, God with us. Her offspring, her seed becomes the curse, takes on a curse. And when we think, God, where are you? We need to understand the simple fact that no suffering we have ever experienced, no hardship that we have ever endured will ever compare to the curse that was put on the Son of God Himself. He became a curse. He will bruise, you will bruise His heel. Basic theology is this, that Jesus was going to come in the flesh. It's not playtime, man. The only time I don't want to throw a ball. That Jesus would come in the flesh, and He would suffer like a human, and that the effect of the deception of the serpent would affect Him more than any of us. We read in Hebrews, I believe, I'm just going to check my notes here, because I don't want to mess it up, but we read in the book of Hebrews that He endured every temptation that we will endure. Listen, you don't think Jesus dealt with anxiety? For those of you that are struggling with anxiety, we read that He was so anxious in the Garden of Gethsemane as He was preparing to go to the cross that He sweat drops of blood. There's an actual medical condition. Uncle Gary, you know what that medical condition is called? There's some big long term for it. There's a medical condition for when you are so overcome with grief and anxiety that you actually begin to sweat drops of blood. And that's the anxiety that He felt. He felt rejection like nobody will ever feel. Not only was His 12 closest friends, one of them very special, absolutely betrays Him, but then the other 11 flee and scatter. And not only are they His friends, but they are the ones that He's created and handpicked and chosen. And they flee from Him. You've never felt rejection like Him. You've never felt loneliness like Him. You've never felt anxiety, depression, despair. You've never felt pain like Him. You've never experienced loss like Him. And here is why. So He can join us. God with us. It's not this fluffy little, hey, God's with us, let's all hold hands and sing about it. He came into this darkness that we brought into this world to rescue us from it. Listen, He could have just wiped His hands and said, you guys are on your own. Deal with it. He could have wiped it out right then and there and ended it. But here's the reality of God. He is not this cosmic figure that had this master plan that said, I'm going to create these people and I'm going to make them do everything that I want to do. He bore us out of love. And I know that didn't make any sense grammatically, but it's what happened. He brought us into this world from a heart of love, and He loved us so deeply and so richly that He wasn't willing to just scrap the whole plan. He said, because I love them so much, I am going to go after them. That's God with us. And He took on a curse. Where is God? He's here with us, comforting us, drawing near to those that are brokenhearted. But he didn't leave it at that, because if he simply came to join us, that would be nice, but we'd have one more in a whole mess. God with us, Immanuel, he came to join us in our suffering, to seek us and find us out, and to take on the curse himself. But more so than that, he came to overcome the darkness. Jen and I, when we decided to set out and do this church, we were kind of naive. We thought, hey, let's start a church, and we really feel like God wants us to. We prayed about it, and we really feel like God's wanting us to do that, and we thought it'd be nice. We got a lot of people we don't want to be there, and it's going to be really cool, and it's going to be hip, and it's going to be easy, and we're going to get together, and I'm going to preach, and it's going to be nice. And I'll tell you what, we face some opposition all the time. We have never experienced the opposition that we're up against. And so we sit here and we think, well, we're up against opposition. Well, Jesus came on a mission to seek and save that which was lost, to restore mankind, to take back from the opposer what he had stolen from us. You don't think that Jesus faced opposition. I just read, it was in Hebrews 4, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are. Cool? But here's the last three words. Yet, without sin. The theology that comes with the Immaculate Conception is phenomenal. Get into it, read it. Jesus born of a virgin. But here it is, that sin and death began to spread all throughout mankind. In the bloodline of mankind, whether you call it original sin, sin inclinate, whatever you want to call it, it's spread. And listen, it's spread. Look around, it's spreading. And it's spread, and it's spread. And somebody had to stop it. And so we have what the Bible calls, what Romans tells us is the second Adam. Someone born outside of a bloodline that was carrying tremendous curse. And he was born into a dark world where everybody sinned. And he lived a life without sin. And we know that not only did he suffer in our sufferings, but he was tempted with our temptations. For those of you that are struggling with sin, for those of you that are in bondage to sin, he struggled with that temptation. We know he went into the wilderness and suffered there for 40 days under temptation from the evil one. But we know that it carried through, and he suffered every temptation. And here's why. So that he can sympathize with us, right? So that he can sit here and look at you and say, listen, if I did it, you can do it. Right? So he can look at you and say, come on, man, stop sinning. I did it. No. So that he can put inside of us the absolute power that we need to overcome sin. Because the reality is that in us, we have this sin that has been spreading and spreading. And there is no solution to it other than to give us a new bloodline and a new hope and a new life. And so Jesus came to say, I am going to live this life the way it ought to be lived. And I am going to live this life in a way that will restore us back to Eden. And will restore us and give us back what was taken. I'm going to live this life in that way. And I'm not going to live it so that I can go there, because I'm already there. He said, I'm going to live this way so that I can find you and take you and lead you there and give you the power to overcome. My favorite passages in all of Scripture is John 16, where Jesus is talking to his disciples and he's preparing them for his death. And he's sharing with them the horror of the world. And he lays out for them, you're going to suffer. It's going to be bad. It's going to be hard. Things are going to get worse. If you guys are sitting here waiting on the world, I don't know what your end time theology might be, but if you're sitting here waiting on the world to get better, it ain't happening. It's getting darker. And Jesus was very clear. You can read Matthew 24. You can read this passage in John. Jesus is very clear that it's going to get worse. It's going to get darker. It's going to get darker. So you wonder, why do these things keep happening? Why is this school shooting the worst in American history? Well, the next one will probably be the worst. And I'm not saying that in a way of trying to speak anything forward. But I'm telling you, the darkness will keep spreading. And we know because Jesus said it. And this is John 16, verse 33. He said, I have said these things to you, talking to his disciples. 3 words that are so crucial right here. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. He didn't say I fixed the world. He didn't say I'm going to become president and set policies in place that is going to end poverty. He didn't say, I'm going to enforce laws that are going to make it so people don't hurt other people. He said, it's going to keep going on. He said, your government is going to fail you. They're going to arrest you. They're going to persecute you. They're going to punish you. People are going to continue to hate each other. Fathers are going to turn against sons. Sons are going to turn against fathers. The devastation is going to continue to spread. But in that, he says, take heart. And we see two places that are given in one little verse. We got to get this, because this is the key. He says, in this world, you will have tribulation. But right before that, he says this, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world, tribulation. In him, peace. In the world, darkness. In him, light. In the world, despair and hopelessness and darkness. In him, hope. Because he has overcome the darkness. If we did not have a God that joined us in it, that took it on himself and overcame it, we would have no hope. But he came and he overcame it. Every force of hell that came against him, because we know that his heel was going to be bruised. And the forces of hell, the very serpent, oh, it's this little snake that we think is so just small and innocent, but it is all of darkness wrapped up into one being. And this little serpent that came to tempt Eve and Adam into taking the fruit came to strike the heel of God. But it doesn't end there. He will bruise your heel is not the end of it. Because we hear next that it says you will bruise his heel, but he will crush your head. Jesus could not, listen, here is a profound truth I want you to get. Jesus could not crush his head without his heel being bruised. See, but he took the bruise as he crushed his head for us, so that the bruise that we deal with, we can be victorious over a dark, dark world. He overcame the world. Immanuel, God with us. It's such a happy thought. But it's war. It's violence. Jesus himself said the kingdom of heaven suffers violence. And those who will have it will take it by force. He crushed the head. He came to lead us out of darkness. And so our plan to escape the darkness is to figure everything out, to stop sinning, right? To no more deal with, I don't want to deal with anxiety and depression anymore, so I'm going to figure out a way to overcome it. I'm going to train my mind. Listen, there's good ideas, good strategies. I'm not even anti-medication. You know, I think sometimes we just have things that are off. But the reality is this. This world is a sinking ship. And there's one way off of it. And it's through Jesus Christ, Immanuel, God with us. Adam, where are you? Jesus says, if you're in me, you'll have peace. Adam, where are you? You're out wandering, searching, seeking, desperately, blindly, aiming to find it. But you can't, because it's in me. And I have come to be with you. He came to lead us out of the darkness. He came into this world to overcome, to join us in it, but again, he didn't leave it there. He came to lead us out. He came to give us the power to overcome. And that's cool. We could all overcome. And we could live forever fighting and overcoming, and fighting and overcoming. But there's a day that's coming when the war will be over. When the darkness will be done away with for good. And he came to lead us to that place. But if his heel wasn't bruised and he didn't crush the head, see, a shepherd can't lead anybody anywhere if he's not with them. What kind of shepherd will lead sheep if he doesn't come and be with the sheep? God could have just set up in heaven and called down and said, I'm up here, come on, come up here. But he came to be with us, to lead us out, to lead us home. And we can read a lot of scripture that talks about it. Colossians 1:13 says, He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son. But I just want to get a little practical with us for a second here. I just want to make a statement, and I hope that it resonates with you. But the reality of it is that we are all searching for an escape, aren't we? We're all looking for an escape. Because in the core of our being, in the very depths of who we are, we realize that this place is broken. And we need to get out. We realize that this ship is sinking and we need off. You might not realize it in your mind, but we're looking for an escape. Jen and I sat and talked a long time on, I believe it was Monday, about Facebook. I'm not one of them anti-Facebook. Well, I am an anti-Facebook person, but I'm a hypocrite. So we go on this computer, and we sit there, and we look at what everybody else is saying about their lives. And we all know it's a bunch of garbage. We all know that what people are saying isn't true. When I go on there and I post a picture of Miles holding lights and he's got a big smile on his face, I'm like, oh, how cute, he's so happy. Well, listen, Miles is happy. I love Miles, he's great. But I'm not posting the pictures of 3 in the morning when he's wet our bed and we have to change the sheets, and me and Jen are doing our absolute best not to get at each other about it, because we're both, half asleep and half awake and trying to communicate, and that just never works. I don't post those pictures. So why do we go on? Why do we love Facebook? Why has Facebook become a phenomenon? Because we don't want the reality that we're in. We want a whole different reality. Because this reality is messed up. So we look to escape. We bury ourselves in computer games, because in those computer games, we're not in this world. We bury ourselves in addictions, because in these addictions, we're not in this world anymore. We bury ourselves in unhealthy relationships, because in these relationships, we can escape this world. But we find in every single one of them, there is no escape. There is no escape. He came to lead us out. He came to take us from here and bring us back, to seek and to save that which was lost. That is Immanuel. That is God with us. Last Sunday was a really rough day for Jen and myself and Miles. We had a wonderful time with everybody at church, and it was a great morning, worshiping and everything. And we were going to go get our Christmas tree with our families out at Stokey Farms. And so we loaded up the car, and we headed out, and Miles fell asleep in the car, which was great, because he slept for the whole car ride. But when we got to Stokey Farms, we had to take him out. And I've heard so many people say over and over again, never wake a sleeping baby. Well, we woke a sleeping baby, and it was like waking a sleeping dragon. We woke him up, and he was just absolutely miserable the entire time. I wish you guys were there. You would see Miles' grandparents. It was phenomenal. They had to run around with him around the trees and play peekaboo, so me and Jenna could have like 5 minutes to cut a tree down. And he was on this poor people on the cart ride that we had there, because he was miserable, crying. And our hearts are breaking for Miles as good parents, but also as selfish people, we're getting frustrated. And so we love him, whatever. Finally, we leave Stokey Farms, and we had home. And then we had a birthday party to be at. So we're like in our moment of parental brilliance. We decided, let's put him back in the car seat and take him to this party. And so we put him in the car seat and take him to the party. And the cool thing is he fell asleep again, completely off schedule. So we fall asleep, we bring him into the party, we put him in a room, and we're having a great time with our friends at this party, talking, whatever. And all of a sudden Miles wakes up and is absolutely just miserable. Probably because we put him in a room and he woke up and he's like, where am I? And that's pretty much his pattern of life. But he was miserable. And so, we're kind of emotionally exhausted at this point. Doing church in the morning can be a little exhausting for us. And so we're a little exhausted at this point. And so we're like, we just got to get him out of here. So after, about an hour being there, we put him in the car seat. And again, in another flash of brilliance, we're like, let's go decorate my mom's Christmas tree at her house. So we put him in the car seat. And I can't remember how that went. Probably blacked it out traumatically. And ended up at my mom's house, and we decorated her tree, which was a wonderful time. We had so much fun. I have to say that because she's right there, but we had a wonderful time decorating the tree, and it was great. And our master plan was this. Miles usually goes to sleep at 9 o'clock. He had taken a late nap, and we decided that, all right, at 10:30, he's probably going to want to fall asleep. And so we'll wait to leave till he falls asleep. And so he started to fall asleep, and around 11 o'clock, we put him in the car seat to take him home. Well, he kept waking up. We put him in the car seat, and he would realize what we've done to him, and he'd wake up, and he would start crying. So we'd take him out, put him back in, take him out, put him back in, and finally we're like, listen, we just gotta get home. We can't do this all night. So finally we just put him in the car seat, and he's losing it. He's just all upset. And where is he? I'm sorry, buddy, for misrepresenting. He's always a happy baby. We put him in the car seat, and he's losing it. And we get down the street, and finally Jenna's like, listen, just pull over. I'm gonna help him out here. So we pulled over, and we're parked on the side of the road, and it's just darkness. is invading our car. And I know some of the darkness that you guys have encountered, so you might think we're a bunch of wimps, but we felt darkness so rich among us and in us. We were so frustrated, we were so angry, we're holding it in because we got a baby, and we're trying not to argue with each other, and we're both in despair and depression. And finally, after just trying to calm him down for 15 minutes, it's midnight, he's not calming down. We're gonna have to suck it up. Put him in the car seat and just go home. And as I'll be vulnerable with you, as we drove through the city, he was screaming. I'm just sobbing. I'm like sobbing out of frustration and heartbreak for my son who's crying. And I'm just so frustrated. And we get home, and I just go and I sit in a room by myself, and Jenna gets him ready for bed and finally gets him to go to sleep. And we both just went to bed. And we woke up the next day and we processed it. And in that moment, I must have said 16 times, God, where are you? Why can't you just help him? Get him to stop crying. Please, do something. Help my son. Make it stop, please. God, if you're a good father, why wouldn't you do something? I mean, I'm not even close to as good of a father as you are. And I would do everything to help right now. Where are you, God? And yes, the next day, we began to talk about it, and God showed me how foolish I was. And how in that moment was an incredible opportunity for me to see who he is. Because I realized, while Miles is screaming in that car seat, I can't take him out. Because I know what's best for him. That I am in this car with him, making sure that nothing is happening. And he doesn't get it. All he understands is he doesn't want to be here. All he understands is that this is miserable for him. And he's crying and screaming, and he's probably wondering where I am. He's probably wondering why Mommy's not doing anything. But we're looking at him and we're thinking, you have to be in this. Because it's very dangerous not to be in this. And he won't understand that until he's a little bit older. I want to tell you something. There has never been a moment of darkness in your life where God hasn't walked with you. There has never been a moment of despair where you've cried out, God, where are you? Where he hasn't been right with you. And you might not realize it. You might not know it. But this is the promise of Christmas. That God is with us. He is with us to find us. He is with us to join us. He is with us to give us what we need to overcome. And he is with us to lead us out. And there's a time when we got home and we took Miles out of that car seat and we put him in our arms and we held him tight, and Jenna did mostly, but we held him tight. And there's a time that is coming when God is going to pull you out of this car seat. And he's going to hold you tight, and you're going to realize that it was all okay. Father, it's so hard for us to understand that. Because we're human and we are so in touch with our five senses that tell us that you're not there. That tell us that it's hopeless and it's over and it's terrible. But God, you're with us. You were there, as hard as it is to understand, Friday morning in Newtown, Connecticut at Sandy Brook Elementary School. You were there. And you knew the pain and the suffering because you endured it yourself. Father, you knew more than anybody will ever know what it's like to watch your child suffer. God, as we endeavor to go out from this place into the dark world, I believe that you can give us peace that passes understanding because you're with us. I believe that you can give us hope in a hopeless world because you are our hope with us and in us. And I believe that we can have lasting joy because we have God with us. God, is many things we can do practically to make sense of that. I just ask one thing from you. This Christmas, give us more of a revelation than we can come up with on our own of you and us. In Jesus' name, amen.